Hi, everybody. This
Hello.
is Dr. K, and I'm so proud and honored to be introducing Dr. Lori Baudino to you. She is one of the most wonderful child psychologists that I've ever met. And, one of the gifts that she has is to really be able to look at the family as a whole, kind of like what I do as a pediatrician, except she approaches it from the mental health perspective. And she's really a wizard in terms of understanding all of the dynamics in the home and all of the factors that ultimately come to influence a child's psychological, mental, social well being. And part of why I was really, really excited that she was willing to take the time to have this conversation is, one of the things that I've seen that I've shared with you all is that there is a higher degree of social anxiety and just anxiety in children more than what we've seen before. And I'm sure that this is impacting your household. And if it's not your household, I'm sure you know of other families whose kids are experiencing some form of anxiety or depression. So I thought that this would be a very timely discussion to hear from this expert in terms of, what she sees going on, because she works with kids all day, every day, and she's in the middle of it. So yeah, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Baudino, and or they call you
Thank
Dr.
you.
Lori, I guess.
Yeah, either way. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yes, you are correct that this is happening and it's an important dialogue to have, and that it's not just one way, that there's multiple ways of looking at this, as your approach alludes to and mine does too. So yeah, let's jump in and hopefully give you all some information that you can use in your own homes.
Beautiful. So why don't we start with what are you seeing? I mean, I just kind of gave these broad overviews and labels of anxiety or depression or whatever else. But what are you seeing? What has come up for you? What are the factors that you're seeing that are concerning you in the midst of this pandemic and all of the things that have come with it?
Yeah. Well, I have to say I've seen some beautiful awareness come up during
Mm,
this pandemic, and I am fully aware. I get a lot of messages from different boards that I'm a part of and professionals. It's clearly an increase in anxiety, an increase in um, the experiences of what our children are going through, and also just like new nuances of what a parent is seeing. That being said, I'm really impressed with how parents are taking on so much more than they ever had to
mm,
before, and really stepping up. And our children are being more resilient. Children are showing that they're saying, "Hey, I need some support," and parents are starting to see, "Okay, this is real. I can help you." Um, at the same time, some of the hardship is, feeling lost, feeling like they don't belong anywhere, feeling a lack of value. Our children are this generation, and some time now, children don't necessarily have the same value as they used to, where, you had a child to help the family and they had a job and they had responsibilities. Children today aren't necessarily living that lifestyle. And now more than ever, their value is even smaller.
mm.
What's my social group? Where do I belong? Who do I belong to? And then there's this burden factor. You have parents that feel like, I have a job, I have a household to run, I have to protect you from COVID, and I have to take care of you. And this is a lot. And children feel that. And they don't want to be a burden. They want to, help. They want to be involved. They want to be a team with their family.
So it's COVID has really changed our entire social structure in many ways within the family. And the dynamics have changed, the responsibilities, as you pointed out, have changed. Um, how do you guide families through this? And I don't know if you think that this is the best place to start. I love also what you were talking about in terms of it's brought up certain things that are actually beneficial for families
Yeah.
to be aware of. Where do you think we should go?
Yeah, I would love to talk about some of the areas to think about, because children typically present, they come in, and these things that we're seeing now are just heightened. And we know this in psychology. We know that when we have added stressors in the environment, when you have a susceptible body and you have this nervous system that's like, hey, I'm used to detecting threat, and now I'm under a big threat that's real, I'm being told there's a threat in the world, then my arousal system goes up and I have more things to start to respond to. And so it's not necessarily that this caused the behaviors that we're seeing, but it's certainly heightened, making it bigger.
Mm.
Um, so I use this analogy of, I probably told you this before, but of a pool, and there's all these droplets of water, and we can't sift them apart to say what caused what, but they're all in there. Now the water is gotten quite full with COVID, and we have to support them to swim and not sink. But there's all these other pieces to it as well. So some of the things I want to point out is to look at preventative planning. This time is so unpredictable, and there's a lot of different ways we can support our children in predictability. And I think that there seems to be a huge range. So like parents either go really to the far end of like strict, like very structured, and schools are doing that, or it's the opposite side of like, let's just see what happens. And I want to introduce that middle ground of just saying when there is more routine, more consistency in how we speak, like fluidity, timing can come in, like our schedules can come just in terms of like how we communicate every day. That consistency can give a sense of support to a child. Setting up the environment, the lighting can give a sense of support that's like, oh, it's always this way. Having certain routines, these habits that we do, and we're seeing kids increase some of their habits, some of their like repetitive behaviors, and certain diagnoses come up of like OCD or attentional issues, and these like heightened experiences we're seeing. But when we think about it, it's amazing how the brain can say, hey, things are out of control. So what I can control is washing my hands. What I can control is how I line my toys up, how I set up my environment, how I eat the same meal every day. These are things that, while we want to help the child have a range and a moderation of what they're doing, it's also brilliant, right? Like I always see it as like, wow, there's a reason why your child wants to play the same game every single day. And so just to, rather than being an alarm bell of like, oh gosh, this is bad, but seeing it as like, okay, this is what this child's asking for. They're giving us information. Now, what can we do with it? I'll pause. I know I get it, excited
No,
into this.
I love this. So in a way, it's we need to make sure that the children feel safe in their environment, that they have enough structure, enough definition of their world, so it doesn't feel like the bottom of their world is coming out from underneath them. Is really what you're saying.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And each family is, going to have a unique situation because depends on how many parents are in the home, who's in the home, what are the schedules, who's working, right? There's a lot of dynamics. And so it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to happen overnight. But if you just start to say, what routine can I set in that can be consistent today? And maybe we just start with one and then we add in. And some of us have been doing this whole time since March, when this all started, but we can adjust it and change and really observe the child. The other thing is to look at the bigger picture. So children need to feel a sense of belonging. They need to have value. And so this is an opportunity without the social experiences. This is, you and I kind of briefly chatted about like, what is, and I was using the words risk benefit. What is the risk of going out and having a social interaction versus the benefit? And some of these we want to sign up for. Some of them we want to say, you know what, this is of value to me. I'm feeling like I'm with like-minded people in terms of safety. You can have a range of different types of mindsets and different cultures, absolutely. But really diving into, okay, if we're all trying to make an agreement about how safe we are in terms of what we feel is comfortable for COVID, then maybe the value is there that our children can have an interaction outside or have a certain activity that they're signing up for. The other part is, could they be a part of something bigger than itself? Now more than ever, our children can be the ones that are changing our world. So what groups can they belong to? What activities can they start to build and create at home that could benefit something bigger than themselves? And that's the definition of grit, is having something bigger than yourself that you're feeling like, I'm going to do this. Like I have this value to it, something more than just me. And I think that's important to kind of think about.
I love that. I love that. So we really have to be creative.
Yeah. I'm like,
Especially in this time and age. Obviously, a lot of the things we were doing before is no longer possible. And some of the things are just not safe. Some of the things that we were doing on a regular basis are just not a great idea right now. But that doesn't mean there cannot be a new way of doing things, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what you're saying. And we just need to
Absolutely.
step out of the box and say, hey, how do we create a new sense of value for our child? How do we
Absolutely.
create a new sense of community, however that community looks?
Right, right. And that burden piece of like, if you feel like you're doing too much at home, I use the statement, as a therapist, we say like, if you're being the circus, you're doing too much. Like
Mm.
you can just like pull back and take off some of the wigs and all the makeup and just be, and just like enjoy and observe your child. And they give you the information that you need.
Mm.
They have creative ideas. They want to be of value. So they'll help in the dishes and the cooking and the cleaning and be a part of the family. And that alone could be a saving grace right now, versus feeling like, oh, it's one more task on my plate. It doesn't mean it's setting the child up for chores and demands and yelling at them. It means bringing them in and saying, this is our family system. And this is one of the first times in our life that we are realizing that there's a lot of interaction that can happen within the home.
Mm.
This is, old like traditions and customs like we used to be in the homes, and we're bringing that back. And I think it's very new. It's very new for us.
I love that. I love that. Um, what you're reminding me of. So until I was 6, I grew up in Iran, and
Mm-hmm.
back in Iran, at least, Jesus, 35 years ago, it was very much like that. There was just the close family units, and we just spent a hell of a lot of time together. And there wasn't like going out to this and that, and there weren't play groups in Iran when I grew up. So you're really, I love what you touched on. So it's really reconstructing our reality in our world in a new way that is still healthy and productive and nurturing, and gives kids a sense of value and belonging. And it's just really a reconstruction is what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah. And of course, for those families that may not have that accessible, or that's not in the home space, that's that risk benefit. That's when you might decide, hey, it's actually a value to go out and seek that group.
Hmm.
And that we're going to take that. Every day we have risks. And so we have to weigh that up, and then giving yourself that permission, and then also giving yourself that grace to, say, I'm not going to judge it, right? I'm not going to get mad at myself if someone does get sick. If something does happen, we're going to cross that bridge. We're not going to let fear stop us, but we're going to choose that this is the right approach for our family, and that we can alter it. We can shift it throughout the time. I have found for so many families, we can't necessarily even explain why we're doing what we're doing during COVID, what our reasoning is, like our rules. You just have to say, this is our family rule. Because if you tried to explain it to someone could out explain you. Someone could say to you, but that doesn't make sense, or that's not accurate, or you could still get it over here when you went over there, but you said no to this, but you said yes to this. Like it's never going to be, just a one way. So it's just really deciding what's right for you, and then trying to be consistent with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And honoring yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Which is
think
so hard. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of families are so caught up in all of these thoughts and expectations from the outside world, and
Yeah.
all of these pressures that they have on them. And that's part of I love what you touched on. I think part of my job half the time is just to give the parents permission and space to do what they think is right.
Yeah.
Half the
Yeah.
time I'm looking at them and saying, hey, what do your instincts tell you? What do you think
Mm-hmm.
is the right thing to do? And they're like, well, I think this, but so and so told me this, and blah blah blah. I'm like, well, trust your instincts.
Right.
You're probably smarter than everyone else in this situation, and trust what you're thinking and feeling.
Right.
But I also love what you touched on in terms of really having families stand back and really do a risk benefit kind of analysis, right?
Yeah.
I think for a lot of families, they've just been drilled like, this is it, this is it, this is it. And
Mm-hmm.
they just feel like they've been pushed into a box, and the door has been locked on the box, and they're just almost trapped. So I think for families to be able to stand back and say, okay, what are the benefits of the situation we have? And I'd love for us to talk about some of the other things, the good things that are coming from, families being really tightly bound together. But also, what are the costs? And, if right now my household is falling apart and my child is having certain things and we're having a really hard time managing this, and even as creative as I want to be, I can't find a solution out of this. But there is an opportunity right outside of our household where one other family can team up with us. So I think families to be given that space and the comfort of knowing that whatever choice is right in their heart is probably the right choice. And it's okay to say, you know what, this picture is not going to be perfect. There will be a little bit of risk by me doing X, Y, or Z, but gosh, the benefits may be huge.
Right. And the benefit, the immune system,
Mm.
that response and that connection to the mental health is so important right now. And it always has been. But, I feel like a crusader constantly saying how these two things measure up. If you are stressed to the point of, and we used to say this about nutrition, if you're stressed managing your child's meals every moment in terms of that healthy, we're in California, like that certain diet, that certain mindset set, if that anxiety about it increases above the vitamin intake, it's, you have to kind of drop down a little bit and find some moderation. This is the same thing we're up against again. Same thing with breastfeeding, nursing, attachment parenting, all these different choices that we've made as parents. If it is stressing you out, then we want to rethink that and say it's not working anymore. It could be working for a certain amount of years, and then you're saying it's not of value to me now, and I'm going to shift it. But certainly right now, more than ever, if you are making a choice and it's right for your family, that level of stress reduces, the anxiety response, your child feels like they are safe, and then they are healthier. They
Mm.
act healthier, they smile more, they laugh more, they release the toxic stress. And, we can receive viruses and illnesses. I don't wish that upon anyone, but we can, hopefully take it in and know that we're okay, that we can work through it. Our bodies are ready for it.
That
Yeah,
is
easier said
perfect.
than done, but yes, yeah,
Yeah, stress and fear are not helpful.
yeah,
Are absolutely not helpful. And I think for a lot of families, it's important for them to realize that kids are much smarter than we give them credit for oftentimes.
yeah.
And I see this in our own household that sometimes the things that my daughter picks up, and all families are aware of this.
Mm-hmm.
Just because your kid doesn't look like they're paying attention doesn't mean they're not.
Yeah,
And if you're currently in a situation where you and your spouse are completely stressed out of your mind and you're just completely overwhelmed and your household is upside down, this may be a time to reflect and say, gosh, like we're put in this situation that's essentially toxic for us. And I don't mean to say this in a judgmental way. I don't mean to say this in a way to create more guilt, right? I think part of the conversation that Dr. Lordy and I are having is, you know, sometimes stress and change brings opportunity. And we can stand back and say, well, God, this isn't working. This doesn't feel right. This feels wrong. And then through that, then you can say, okay, what parts of this aren't working? What parts of this are not healthy for our family? And then how do I make the right choices to then pivot out of this and create a scenario that's less stressful, that's less fear-based, that's less overwhelming, and ultimately healthier for all of us as a family?
absolutely. And this is science. This is where the energy work and the mindfulness comes into science. And we know that we have that potentiality when we present something and we have that potential for thriving, we can obtain it. And so you have to think, is the stressor inside this home or is it outside the home? Where is it and what do I have control of? This is a great opportunity when we have anxiety, when we have, one of the biggest parts of my work this year, especially, has been helping parents find the predictability in parenting,
Hmm.
to really get away from this idea that parenting is hard and instead see it as it's predictable. We know that this happens and then this is the response. And the more we can get that predictability, there's less of a reaction, there's less triggers, there's less worries, because we're like, oh, of course, this is happening. And we're just in it and we're present with it. And when we're in that feeling, it dissipates. Feelings are transient. They come in and they go out. And so we have some choices. I wanted to kind of segue into another strategy that's come up, and there's these moments where children are sitting and they're quiet, or they're doing their work, or things seem calm, and they're beautiful moments. It's kind of like when your child's finally asleep, kind of thing. And I want us also not to don't wake the sleeping child kind of thing, but to realize that those moments also need to be supported, in the sense that we take breaks from the sameness. We give our children an opportunity to shift. And so we might notice I love how you're reading, you're taking your time reading. In about 20 minutes, at this time, we're going to get outside. And it's not that I want to shift the child and make them all worked up, but it's just that they are so used to coming from a place in social life where things changed. Like, there was stimulation throughout the day with school and with friends and different interactions coming at them in the world. And the sameness can get like stretched to so thin that then there's these behaviors afterwards. And the parents like, what happened? Where did that come from? And it's like almost like you only can stretch something so far. And then it either bounces back, great, if that's your child, or it breaks. It's like, oh, I'm spent and I can't get back. And so noticing those really lovely moments when you feel like, oh gosh, this is my chance, I'm going to go talk to a friend, or I'm going to get some work done, but also know, okay, but I'm going to stop myself a little short and go in and just say something to my child. I'm going to recognize them, or I'm going to set them up for what's next. Just so we don't miss those moments where you're getting it before the big upset happens. I want us to get a little on top of it, a little bit ahead of what we know is going to happen.
That's amazing. And I think this circles back to that conversation of, having certain structures in place to make your child feel safe and to feel connected and to be belonging, right? Because if your 8-year-old, 5-year-old, however old they are, they're just kind of on a boat on their own, kind of floating through their ocean, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, there's no one around me. They're going to start freaking out, right?
Yeah. It's just like that. It's like all of a sudden they're like, wait, what do you mean? There's no one around.
And part of what comes up for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is for some families where right now having their kid go to school is not a possibility, either for safety reasons or because the school is not open. So a lot of the structure of what used to be is still not there, and maybe may not be there for another year. Who knows? Um, Having families look at essentially teaming up with others to essentially kind of co-parent. So essentially the things that we call pods, right? To create scenarios where, the children, if for whatever reason the parent doesn't have the bandwidth to be there all the time, to work with others to make that happen. And I think this goes back to that discussion of, risk versus benefit, right? What are the risks of having some person now part of your family unit and increasing risk, versus the benefits of now your child having someone else to interact with and having that person help create some of that structure? I'd love to hear what your comments and thoughts are and how you've guided families, in considering some of these things, because I know some of this is hard, and not all families feel immediately comfortable with these ideas. And I know we have some families where they're looking for a pod, but other families are not considering it right now because they're like, well, that's too much risk.
Yeah. I mean, it's coming up in two ways. I was trying to think of two things. I know that certain schools, there's a feeling of the pods being exclusive, meaning that there are families that can't access it or it's not available to them. So I know that is challenging. It kind of pulls at my heart of just that it's not always available. And so just to know that as our children are in school where they're watching another child that might have no access to anybody, and what that might be like, how could we reach out to that child? That's something on my mind that, I have thoughts about, but I don't necessarily have a great answer for what someone could do, because it takes some effort and there is that risk. That being said, there are many families that have the ability to collaborate and connect and share that load. And there's a lot of vulnerability that comes up when you're sharing a family dynamic. And it's also a beautiful opportunity. I mean, again, this is back to like these olden times, right? This cultural, we live in a community where everyone takes care of each other, the whole like Montessori or Reggio Emilio type of living, where you're living and schooling all in the same community. um, these are ideas that are possible with knowing that you're sitting down and having the conversation, maybe not face to face, but over Zoom, having the conversation and saying what's important to us. And it gives us an opportunity to say, like, this is the way our family would have to do it. Are you willing to take those risks? Like, are you willing to do those safety precautions? And hopefully, if everyone is, they have that opportunity. There's so much growth that can happen in terms of a child learning from another child, learning from different parenting styles, different cultural backgrounds, different religions that could come up, different preferences within the home, how we handle upsets, how we handle schooling. And there's so much learning that can take place, and that it comes back to, it's not an all or nothing. It won't be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's about, can you learn as you go? Can you keep asking the question and keep practicing these ideas together? I'm hoping it could really bring people together.
I that really resonates with me. And that comment of, it takes a village to raise a child, that's really what's coming up for me. And
Yeah.
for us to start looking at ourselves as part of a community, rather than, well, it's just me or it's just us. And maybe that just us now becomes, the other families. And, it's not to say that we need to put ourselves in undue risk. This isn't to say for anyone to be negligent or irresponsible at all, because we know what the consequences of that are. But I think at the same time, for us to kind of step out of our little box, and, through creativity and a little ingenuity and some consideration to make sure safety factors are, still in mind, to create a new version of reality where we really foster families and children to be as healthy as they can be. And I think that that's really what we're talking about over here, right? How do we step out of our little box to create a new version of reality that will be really nurturing and healthy, and just help children thrive in every way?
Yeah, especially at this time. Again, I think it's just like reevaluating as we go. Because you ultimately would choose, let's say, one family to be with, or a few families, and then you might realize that there's a whole group that you're not connected with anymore, or you're not even aware of anymore, because you don't have access to them. And so then we might have to keep being creative, like, how can we access those communities? How can we reach out even further? Um, but with this idea of COVID and wanting to be socially distanced and safe, and keeping in mind everyone's immune system, and the fragileness that comes with that, we do have to start small. We do have to start with what's close to us, and know that you're not alone. You're not having to be at home and saying, I'm the only one experiencing this. I'm the only one having to make another meal. I'm the only one having to work and school and this. There are families out there at the exact same time right now doing the same exact thing.
In the same exact boat, with the same struggles, with the same challenges.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of people reaching out to one another.
Yeah.
And I have this image in my head of, groups of a few people holding hands together and just kind of creating that bonding energy, where, they're there for one another, and they're like, hey, I got you.
Yeah.
I think if we can start these conversations, and that's really where everything starts, right? By just people reaching out to one another and being open to the
Mhm.
possibility. And, through that conversation and through that possibility, saying, hey, does this feel right to me? Is this safe? Is this
Yeah.
appropriate? And, sometimes it's really surprising. This is one of the things that I find myself also doing in the office. Sometimes I'm the one just nudging the families. I'm like, why don't you go have a few conversations with people? Why don't you start some conversations and see what happens? And then I check in with the family, and 3 weeks later, like, oh my God, we found so and so, and they happen to be the perfect match for us. And now our kids are thriving, and they're so happy, and they're riding bikes together, and blah, blah, blah. We don't know what's possible until we actually initiate the conversation to allow that possibility to come to life, right? And I think that's one thing that I see a lot of people fearful of. They're not even willing to talk about a possibility, which means then it becomes impossible for something to happen.
And right now, some of the things that parents are seeing, because you're seeing your child for the 7 hours that you never saw them before, that they were at school, so a little give or take, less or more. You're seeing the wiggles, right? You're seeing the inattention that we call inattention. You're seeing learning differences where you're like, oh, I thought they were so capable, and they are so capable, but you're seeing the nuances of it. You're seeing the different learning. You're seeing them at a heightened expectation, and they are like little college students at 5 years old doing these things they never would have ever had to do before, and they're doing it. And you're seeing all the nuances, and it can feel challenging. And then you're transitioning into a hat of a teacher, into a hat of a cook, into a hat of a physician, into a hat of a mom or dad or a care provider. And just to know that that's also happening in another home is so important. I think social media has become so big because everyone's like, look at me, I'm doing the same thing, look at me. But instead of looking at it as like a one size, like I'm showing you me, it could be more of a we. And we're saying this like, we're connecting. So like in social media, it's like, instead of saying, I'm going to talk about myself, it's let's talk to somebody. Let's talk together and collaborate together. Let's connect friends together. Let's have groups. Our kids have groups. And then it's more meaningful. Then the social media, the content, the online access is engaging. It's not just like I'm watching someone, I'm just staring at myself.
I hope everyone caught that one phrase that came out of Dr. Lori. It shouldn't be about me, it should be about we.
Yeah.
And I think if we all start looking at things like that, I mean, that's the whole purpose of why both she and I took the time to have this conversation, right? We need to start creating community. We need to start creating extended relationships that didn't really exist before because frankly, we didn't need them. But that just because the world has changed and things have changed doesn't necessarily mean we can't adapt to this change.
Right.
And
Right.
adaptation means finding new ways to do what you were doing before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely believe in this collective consciousness. So this is, it's surging throughout our world. This idea that we are social distancing, but we're not emotionally distancing. This is an opportunity to say like, I'm having feelings here. I'm experiencing relationships for the first time. I'm seeing my child, my spouse, my family members for the first time every minute of the day. And this is new. It's not hard. It's just not as predictable as we are used to. We're used to the predictability of like just the rat race and go, 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 go. And then we had to bring that race home and keep going with it, but somehow do it all under one space. And so there's some newness. And even though we've been doing this now for, a long time, it still feels like a lot of people are waiting for it to end to start living, waiting for it to like, once it's different, then we can do this. And we might need to kind of allow ourselves to say, this is for now, this is, and let's make these connections.
And let's look at the good things that have come from this, right? uh, I recall a conversation with one of our friends who were saying like, God, we used to spend a lot of time doing really meaningless things, like spending an afternoon roaming in the mall and ultimately having no real benefit coming from that.
Yeah.
So I think another part of this conversation is that, strangely, and as painful as COVID life is, and there's nothing easy about where people are and what they're going through, but it is redefining life, and it's in many ways forcing us to look at what matters, what are our values, what are the things that are most important to us. And through that, a lot of the fluff and a lot of the materialism, a lot of the wasted energy and expenditures that really made no benefit in people's lives. Like I see a lot of those kind of like the fat has been trimmed off in a way.
Yeah.
A lot of those things are exiting people's lives, and people are really becoming present to, well, what's important to me, what's important to our family, and how do we prioritize these things over all the other stuff that really doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, as a psychologist, I'm so aware of the devastation and the stressors that are happening, and that anxiety is still, and it was before COVID, one of the leading diagnoses that we see. Suicide was it's like the top cause of death, their second top cause of death in 2019. There's these stats, right? And to me, it's like an opportunity for us to say this mental health is so important and we need to take care of it. And if I sit here and tell you all the hardship that people are going through and how horrible these children, all the tragedy that's going on, these children, we get inundated by that. And so I find myself knowing that yes, these illnesses and these challenges exist. They absolutely do. And I truly believe, two of us sitting here right now, there are support, there are resources that we can look at the whole system and say, okay, we're going to look at this way and this way and this way, and we're going to get you through this. We're going to be here. We're going to be your teammates. That's why I'm doing this work. Like, there are people, and it's not just me. There's so many, but it's not a part of our culture to say, hey, I need help. To see mental health as something of value. It's seen as like, oh, it's taboo, or oh, those doctors are not going to help me, or they are going to lecture me, or going to make me sit for hours and spend all this money talking. It isn't. It's always been seen as like a fluff, and it's so important. And to me, we boost the mental health by saying, let's connect. Let's look at the positives. Let's say, oh my gosh, I finally see that my child needs help reading, or my child is wiggling and they're not enjoying their teacher. There's something going on in that dynamic. This is an amazing teacher, amazing child, and like something's not reaching. Let's work on that. Let's advocate for them. My child's not sleeping. Okay, well, sure, sleep is an issue, right? But it's so important. Let's work on how do they soothe? How do they fall asleep? Let's make it a priority versus getting in the car and driving around to all the different activities. So, of course, this is real. And I get inundated, like I mentioned, inundated by like lectures to go to of like, did you know that this is, causing trauma for our children, and the social aspect is causing trauma, and this is traumatizing and anxiety provoking. And I also want to say, we can support from the inside out. We can look at, okay, are we supporting our children at home? Are they practicing with their siblings this social life? A lot of our kids have built-in social systems that they've never used before, and now they get to use them.
So
I can rant.
Honoring yourself, honoring yourself, and looking to see what things we need to really bring about optimal health in every level is what you're saying, and to stand back and look at the rat race that I think we all were a part of. I mean, I know our household was guilty of that. We were
Absolutely.
spending time and energy doing things that ultimately were not significant to us. And we look back, we're like, God, wow, why were we doing that? And I think the other part to really highlight what the important thing you said is to really become present to what do we need? What do our children need? And take this opportunity as a time for us to really pay attention to what is in front of us. I love what you brought up, because there's a lot of families where on one hand there are kids who are really struggling and it was never brought up by the teachers. And I have some families that are like, my kid is really struggling to read, and I can't believe that this was never brought up before, because all the teachers before would say, oh, they're fine. We also have some families where it's really interesting that the families are like, holy cow, my kid is ripping through this material like it's going out of style. And wow, they may actually be gifted. And no one told me that they may actually be gifted. Yeah. So it's really, I think, an opportunity for us to become very present to what's there. And through that presence, we can then understand, well, do we need to bring support here? Do we need to shift? Maybe this kid needs to continue being homeschooled because they're thriving in homeschooling.
Yeah, they need a different schooling.
Yeah. But really standing back and saying, hey, what's there in front of me, rather than trying to trudge through with the old patterns that we had. And I think that for me, at least, that's one of the things that I see with some people who are still really struggling. They're still trying to do things as they were a year and a half ago, and hoping that they can go back to that pattern of living. And, the world has been flipped upside down, and the sky is now the ground, and the ground is now the sky, except we're still trying to walk on the ground, except that means you're upside down. And that's really hard. So I think going back to that, hey, how can we adapt? The world has changed. The world is upside down. So how do we adapt to walking on the sky? and get used to this, at least for the time being. And if it goes back to the way it was, then we can go back, but maybe it won't.
Right. Yeah. And that idea of like coming from adversity, we tend to share that dialogue of like, oh, this bad happened to me and this bad happened to me. And we just get this perpetual wheel going of like hardship and pain and suffering. And what's your child losing out on? And my child's losing out on that too. And we could spin that wheel the other direction and say, or, put some brakes on the side of it so it doesn't roll as much and say, hey, this is also what they're getting from it. This is what we're doing. And we kind of pass that consciousness around and saying all the things they are getting from it. And it helps us then view the windows that are missing, right? The little gaps, so we can fill them in. It's really, really an incredible place to look at it. So it's being able to hold both, right? It's not being naive to the hardships, and it's also welcoming all the strengths that are there.
Yeah. And I think being comfortable with the change, right? Accepting the change, if possible, embracing the change. Sometimes that's easier said than done. And I mean, for some people, I know that the change that they're going through is just god awful. And, whether it's losing their home, losing their jobs, loss of loved ones. I mean, like, I don't mean to make light of this, because for some people, the change that's happened to them is just simply awful. But I think for others who are fortunate enough to not have had that kind of horrible loss, that kind of severe traumatic change, to look and say, like, God, this life is weird. This life is different. This life is not necessarily what we would have chosen, but it's here. It's what we've been given. And now how do we turn these lemons into lemonade, as they say, right?
It's a real testament to being in the present, to being okay that if things are okay, they are okay. That we don't have to find something wrong because we're supposed to have hardship right now. And then what can we do with it? How can we help others? How can we connect? How can we be that community, that engagement? And how do we look at it? So then we think about the child and thinking about these emotions that are coming up. A lot of need for that. We talked about routine, repetition, and just they want truth tellers. They want, I talk to parents about being authentic, that you are allowed to say, I'm about to freak out. I'm about to have a big feeling. We can change and have a range of emotion, of expressiveness, when you're kind of trying to stay status quo and calm through everything and your voice is really calm, but inside you're boiling. I'd rather see authenticity. I'd rather have your child see that, like, oh, mom had some big, strong feelings about that. And she's letting us know the rules, and she's setting that limit, and she's being clear and consistent and authentic. And so that's going to happen. And I think that's a lot of fears too, is that in this moment, your children and your family in that home, even your work world is now in your home. There's a big vulnerability being crossed here. This big, like, Pandora's box of, like, I can see into your world, right? I can see a little closer than I've ever been before. And so, yes, it's vulnerable. And yes, we can be real and start to kind of decide who am I in this space, and how can I show up for my child? How can I model for them, what's real, what emotions are coming up? Not being so fearful of these feelings we have.
Because children see through it. That's, I think, what you brought up, right? Kids can see through our disguises, for lack of another way of calling it. And they're smart enough to know what's going on, and if anything, it causes them confusion, because they're seeing a discrepancy. They're like, well, mom is smiling, but I don't feel her smiling.
Right.
And sometimes that creates more turmoil for the child than if you were to be authentic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of our sensory kiddos, or that high arousal, that stress response, if you're under the radar, they can't detect you. So they just keep pushing, keep screaming, keep yelling, keep name calling, keep hitting, to keep this pattern going, because they're like, are you really with me on this lifeboat? Because I'm here and I'm on my boat sinking, and are you really with me? I need to see that you see how serious this is. And so we kind of get to arouse ourselves, not from a place of anger or from a place of, I'm so disappointed in you, you're a burden, but from a place of like, I see you. And now we're going to get our lifeboat out, or, we're going to find some protection. But they might need to see that you're really authentic, like you really get it. Not because you read the book and you were supposed to be empathic, but just because you're there. So if you're not scared at night and your child's scared, you don't have to be scared. You get to show them like, you're scared and I'm not, and we'll get through this together. If they're having a big upset, big meltdown because they're not getting what they need, and you could talk about all the things you are upset about too, and work through it together. There's a lot of sharing the load happening. A child's having a stressor and they're placing it on the parent, saying like, here, you take it. And the parent saying, I don't want to take it, and wanting to shove it back. But the child's just saying like, am I safe to, can you be with me through all of my ups and downs? Can you be here in my worst of self? And we absolutely can. It doesn't mean you allow complete chaos and harm to yourself or others. It just means that you're saying yes, and this is what we're going to do with it.
They want to feel connected or accepted. So.
And safe. That's safe, right? Safety. What do I do with it? This is too much. It's too big. At times it's too big. And then at times it's not. And also like noticing that child's face, noticing like if you're taking it in and thinking my child's feeling this, they're feeling sad because they are longing for this. Are they, or did they just make a comment about something that they're remembering? Like how much is what's yours and what's theirs? Because children, they have beautiful faces to show what's really going on. They have beautiful bodies that are movers, they're movers. So if you see a shift in their body, that's when we want to pay attention. But some of the words they're saying, they're exploring, they're sharing ideas. So we can take it and stretch those words out. This is a time to stretch it and say, oh, you're thinking about school? Let's talk about school. What was it like? What do you remember? Versus being like, oh, they're agony, they can't go to school. And then you're fighting this crusade of like, I'm just trying to find every school to get them into. Maybe they're just wanting to talk about this school.
I like that.
Lots of ways to explore this.
Well, anything else that's coming up for you to share with our audience, with our community?
With the extreme end of that safety, the risks of these mental states, I think something that I value in your work as well is just that it is giving me opportunity to read more and research more. And this link about looking at the gut, looking at the body, looking at movement is so imperative. And I just want to always make sure we're coming back to that, of just that when the words are said by your child, if there's some harmful expressions being made or actions being taken in terms of like language or thinking, like that depressed state or that anxiety state, that is what a lot of parents are talking about, that we're looking at how are we supporting their nutrition, how are we supporting their sleep right now, things that we can control. These are things that we can absolutely access. How are we increasing their creativity right now, getting out in nature, finding ways, even if it's one flower that you have on your porch, because you have a small little porch and you have a plant and you want to get a plant. These are things that you'll be amazed that give your child a place to connect. Because it's not all just my child is, this COVID made my child feel these devastations. There's ways to support, because when your body feels good, your brain feels good, and it all works together. So I love being able to refer to you and saying, okay, we're going to get a workup. We're going to look at what's going on inside the body. We want to understand.
Yeah. The physical health absolutely influences the mental health, and it goes both ways. Yeah.
Exercise, and it's unfortunate, like if PE is on Zoom, that's great. Really try to enforce that, really try to see it as like it's significant, even if it's just for a little moment. But then also, like, how are you chasing your child up to brush their teeth, or running outside? Have you tried some jumping jacks? Have you tried to put music on and just have like a dance off? And get that system going. These are things that, yes, it's wonderful to have friends to do that with. They're your kids to have friends, and they also can do it themselves. They can also do it with you.
Yeah. And this could be a beautiful bonding opportunity for parents and kids to share special moments, whether it's teaching your kid how to ride a bike or teaching them how to do something that they haven't done before. And through that, creating really beautiful new memories that will last for a very, very long time.
Yep, definitely, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, keep moving, moving. Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else that you think
So
is important?
much. So much. Yeah, I think that this is, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about the Collaborative Health Summit, to think about coming, and I hope that's okay to say,
Yes,
but
please.
just an opportunity to meet all the different providers and see how the whole child is looked at when we understand from your work as with pediatrics and that functional medicine side, and from looking at auditory processing right now is so important. And we're realizing, oh, is my child, yes, they hear, but are they integrating what they're hearing and coordinating it to then execute the response? Are they the nutrition side? Are they getting that sensory support? How are they sleeping? I'm hoping that this is a day where everyone can come and be in one place to learn from one another. And I truly believe when we understand the whole child, then things become predictable and we have resources and ways to support our child, and they get interested in it and they learn. And so I think it's going to help the children and us parents and other providers too. I'm hoping, I don't want any psychologist out there to not know how to look at the whole body. When we hear a behavior, you hear attention issues, we got to say, okay, but why? So easy to not pay attention, to have an issue with attention, but where did it come from? What's causing it?
I love that. And for all of you that don't know, so the summit that Dr. Laurie is talking about is this beautiful collection of experts from all walks of child's behavioral, mental, cognitive health that she has brought together to really give you the information you need to understand your child in every regard. And you guys have heard me talk about sound processing and sensory processing and some of these things. So she's really bringing this all together in one place, in one summit, for all parents to gain awareness of all of these super, super important things. So we'll definitely be sharing links to that and giving you the information so you can access it.
Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
just as always, I hope people will reach out, ask questions, know that there's resources. I'm loving having workshops and gatherings and parent nights and just places to have discussion. It's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's maybe a perfect place for us to kind of close this conversation with, every possibility starts with a discussion. Every possibility starts with one being open to saying, hey, there's another way to do things. I don't know what that other way is right now, but I'm going to start the discussions. And the me needs to become we. We need to start becoming a village, really. We need to form our own little villages in our communities, and for people to start looking at this as, we're all in this together. We're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. We're all dealing with the same mess in a different way. And the more we can support one another, the more we can come together to be with one another, the better everything becomes for everyone, because the people that are giving will get just as much back. And we just need to open our hearts, open our doors, open our phones, and really start becoming present to like, hey, I'm not alone. We're not alone. Our families, we are in one house, but there are others that we can connect with in whatever way. And this is where your creativity and your heart and your mind can guide you to see how this village and this community can come together for you.
Yeah. Start waving across the way to neighbors, say hi to the animals outside, just find ways to connect. You can still have a mask on, you can still keep your distance, but there's ways to still connect. You absolutely work with children, because when you said we, I was like, that's so fun, right? Like it's we all just started singing that, right? It's like a kid's song.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for being here. Thank you for taking the
My
time to
pleasure.
share all of this wisdom and these pearls. And gosh, I really hope that all of you who have been watching really found something valuable in this discussion, and that the discussion can help guide you in terms of how to navigate this COVID life that we've been given. Thank you,
Me
Dr.
too.
Lori.
Thank you. Have a
Be
great
well.
day.
Thanks you all. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye, guys.